Most people seeking a second passport are not from the Western world. They're from China, they're from Russia, they're from the Middle East, and other emerging places where people don't trust their government anymore. Places like Central America, increasingly some parts of Asia. And so if you're a Westerner, your needs and your opportunities for a second passport are going to be different from that of almost everything out there that's marketed to the general public. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on the best passports for a Westerner. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson. If you want to learn how Nomad Capitalist helps entrepreneurs and investors get their second passport, live the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle, reduce their taxes, go where they're treated best, learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. Now, if you go out and you start looking up second citizenship, you'll find Nomad Capitalist. But you'll also find a lot of folks who are in the business of selling commoditized citizenship programs. You make a donation or you buy some government-approved real estate and you can get a passport. On the higher end, there are programs like those in Malta and Cyprus where you make a much larger donation or you buy a lot more real estate and you can get citizenship there. But these are the commoditized programs that I think really work for a lot of folks. I do recommend them to people that I'm helping from time to time. But if you're a Westerner, understand that you are, in most cases, less than 10% of the market for these programs, okay? Besides what I imagine are also tax reasons, there is a reason why most of these companies don't have an office in the United States or Canada or Australia. In fact, most of them are based in the Middle East or in China. Or in places that might serve Russians, like Cyprus, for example, because that's where the demand is. And so they're mostly speaking to those people who have a passport that doesn't allow them all the travel privileges that you do, and that have a different perspective. Now, I think it's important if you're a Westerner to learn from the folks who are buying these passports, because these people have seen some adversity in their lives and in their country's recent history. They know what it's like to be from a country where they can't travel anywhere and people aren't always welcoming of them. They know what it's like to have your government take from you, or to have your currency collapse, or to have a dramatic loss of freedoms. And I think a lot of Western countries are at risk of suffering some of those same fates, right? I mean, this Western paradigm we've had for so long won't last forever. Taxes are going up. Freedoms are going down. And while I'm not a doomsdayer, I think it's a good idea to be prepared. So let's learn from those people, and let's be the Westerners who actually do have a second citizenship, who have what I call citizenship insurance. But the good news is you have a few more options than those folks, okay? If you are American, if you're Australian, you have a wider set of options in most cases than a Chinese or a Qatari citizen. And I hesitate to say that before we get into the list. I hesitate to say that because I think sometimes people enjoy the idea of swimming in all the options. I have so many options. Just having the options doesn't mean you have the passport, doesn't mean you have the insurance policy, doesn't mean you're protected, right? But let's talk about the different options that you have, and you can figure out which one works best for you. Now, the first thing that Westerners have that a lot of other people don't is citizenship by descent. Okay, so if you've got a parent, grandparent, or great-grandparent from a number of different places, you can qualify for citizenship. And we've helped people with everything from Canadian to British to Irish, Hungarian, Polish, New Zealand, and a handful of Mexican, handful of other citizenships. And so go through your family tree. Sometimes I'll talk to folks and we will uncover, oh, I actually have a passport in my family tree. And depending on how quickly we can get that passport, that could be a great tool to really help you. I had a gentleman recently who didn't realize he qualified for a British passport. And a British passport is one you can obtain through your family tree more quickly than many of the others in that category. And so he was able to fulfill his financial goals a lot faster and not have to go out and spend a lot of money simply by having us help him get that passport and then put the rest of his offshore plan in place. So that's step number one, check your family tree. So the good news is that people from Western countries tend to have those kind of ancestry, right? I mean, there's not a North Korean citizenship by descent program. So this is something that's an option for you. Other options for Westerners are paper residence and fast-track naturalization programs. Now, what I've said before, fair, unfair, it's not my decision. But countries view themselves at a certain point in the pecking order, okay? And what their general position is if your country is above our line in the pecking order, then we make things relatively easy for you. If your country is below where we think we all are in the pecking order, we're going to make things difficult for you. Now, certainly, if you're Chinese or you're Indian or you're Russian and you want to go to some Western European country, they're much more egalitarian about it. But even a lot of other Western countries like the United States, there's certainly a pecking order and they act accordingly. Okay? So what that means is if you have a Tier A passport, if you've got a really good passport, then more countries, a lot more countries in some cases, are going to see you as someone that they want to give a residence permit to, or even they want to put on the fast track to citizenship. I'll give you a high-level example. I made a video where I talked about the so-called Austrian Citizenship by Investment program that's kind of been floating out there as something that I think only like a couple of people have ever done. It's not a formal program at all, but what it is if you go and make a really substantial investment in Austria, some people in the government will consider whether you should be eligible for citizenship. And from everything that we hear about it, you're a lot more likely to get it if your name is John Doe than if your name is Ching Kwai Kwop. They're not looking to make waves. A lot of countries are not looking to make waves. And that's not Andrew Henderson talking, that's the governments of these countries talking. And I've talked about the emerging countries that I favor in many cases, where it's easier to get a residence permit. Some of those countries do, unfortunately, make it difficult for people from the Middle East or from India to get a residence permit. So let's talk about two opportunities. Number one is the paper residence. This is where you go, you establish a residence permit, and you don't necessarily have to live there for very long or even much at all to keep that residence permit going. And then after 2, 3, 5, however many years, you can come back and claim your passport. And so residence permits are a lot easier for Western citizens in those cases. I often see them promoted. I see some of the countries that we talk about. I go into the Indian and the Pakistani and that kind of ecosystem, and I see them talking about some of those countries. And I know from all my experience there, these countries treat them much worse, unfortunately. So if you're a Westerner, you've got a leg up on that. And so again, I think that why a lot of the citizenship industry talks about commoditized programs like in the Caribbean where you just make a donation and they don't care where you're from is because most of their clientele, 90% of their clientele, wouldn't qualify, at least easily, to get a residence permit where all you have to do is hire one employee or incorporate a company or put $20,000 in the bank or put $25,000 in government bonds or buy a small apartment or whatever, okay? Those countries, especially the ones that are more lenient in terms of granting citizenship, are much more difficult towards people from emerging countries based on my pecking order theory. You also have opportunities to have your naturalization fast-tracked, again, kind of like the Austrian model of doing something interesting. How can you contribute to the economy? I had a guy the other day, he said, I want to start a company somewhere, and I'm going to go out and hire 50 people right away. There are countries you could go, and depending on how high level those 50 employees are, you could say, hey, listen, I'd like to bring 50 employees. What can you do for me? There are some countries that perhaps if you had the right connections and you could go out and you could just say, hey, we'll give you a recommendation for citizenship and we'll send it up to the flagpole. And again, I think that's going to be easier if you have a Western passport than if you're from somewhere else. I'm not saying there aren't some countries that wouldn't love a Chinese entrepreneur to come and hire 50 or 100 people and they might work with them. What I'm saying is there's more opportunities for Westerners. Now, the third approach that I would recommend for Westerners to consider in getting a second passport is the citizenship by investment route. The one downside that Westerners have in their passports and with their citizenships is Western countries are much more aggressive in collecting tax. And so if you're a successful entrepreneur and you're from a country like Egypt, for example, I've talked to a number of Egyptians, they're like, we don't really worry too much about it. We want the visa-free travel, we want the opportunities, the healthcare, the schooling, the prestige. Tax, I know the guy comes around. You try that in a Western country, the IRS, HMRC, CRA, they're coming down on you like a ton of bricks. Even a lot of European countries where people don't think the tax man is so aggressive, they are. And so that's kind of the change of pace. And so if you want to get a second citizenship quickly, sometimes that can help your financial situation. And citizenship by investment is indeed among the fastest ways, probably the fastest way in most cases. And it certainly is commoditized to where, yes, they'll take Chinese, they'll take Russians, they'll take whomever, but they'll also take Americans, they'll take Canadians, they'll take pretty much anyone who's got a clean record, who's not a terrible person, who seems like a good person to have as a citizen, and who has the money to pay. And so the good news for Westerners is, because you don't have the same need for reaching the Tier A status that some of the other folks do, you can use some of the cheaper citizenship by investment programs. It's not that often that I'll recommend to a Westerner to go out and get the Malta citizenship by investment or the Cyprus citizenship by investment. And when I have someone who hires us, who has a 9-figure net worth, what we'll go through first is, well, maybe we could move part of your business to a country and negotiate something with them directly with the people at the top of the government. And that does happen. Doesn't always work, but that does happen. But if you already have a good Western passport and you're trying to get a citizenship insurance policy, the idea of going out and spending $800,000 when you could spend $100,000 becomes kind of unnecessary. And that's the good thing that I found about folks who have U.S., Canadian, et cetera passports, is they don't really need that top tier citizenship by investment. We can generally go in and get, if not the least expensive, one of the least expensive. And so for that reason, I think a lot of times it just makes sense for certain people, especially if you've got a financial incentive, to just go out and get citizenship by investment in Dominica, in St. Lucia, in Antigua, wherever it may be. So that's an option for some folks if you don't have ancestry and you just don't want to wait and you don't want to take your chances. That's another thing that I think is important. So understand, as a Westerner, you have more options than most folks. Understand that most people in the business are not talking to you. And so your needs are going to be different. The perspective is going to be different. You probably, if you're going to be living overseas, want to integrate some international tax planning, again, because Western countries are going to be much more difficult than they would in a country like Russia to someone leaving, or in a country like China to someone leaving, right? So you want to get that holistic advice, but the good news is you have options. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.